morning. First, thanks to the chairs for the introduction, and also thanks to the organizers for the opportunity to present today. I'd like to talk to you about how we're looking at Roche and Genentech to deliver value with digital solutions. I'm the head of our smart devices group, where we're focused particularly on connected drug delivery technologies as well as software as a medical device across the portfolio of Roche and Genentech products. My goal today is that I can tell you a little bit about the lessons we've learned to date about digital health tools. I'll talk a little bit about what is the science of the application of these technologies say versus the white papers and marketing hype that the companies that are offering these technologies say, because they're different in some cases. We, in the last year and a half, have conducted some interesting market research, both internally with our stakeholders and also with patients and healthcare professionals to understand for these digital solutions what value propositions matter and how should we be thinking about design and development of those solutions. And then finally, understanding sort of what's the unique value of device connectivity specifically. What are some of the approaches to behavior change? I think Aurelio teed this up very well. And then how do you go about, as a pharma company, finding partners who can deliver these digital technologies for you, and what are some of the criteria you should be looking at? So let's talk about separating the science from the marketing hype first. There's a couple of landmark studies that were published in the peer-reviewed literature in the last couple of years that maybe for the first time showed that some of the marketing hype wasn't true. So the Heartstrong clinical trial was a study of 1,500 patients using medication adherence solutions, digitally enabled medication adherence solutions, and it was a 12-month interventional study. And they found no improvement in medication adherence, and they found no improvement in health outcomes through the use of these digital tools. And it was a compound intervention that integrated wireless pill bottles, lottery-based gamification incentives, and social support. And it did not significantly improve medication adherence or vascular readmission outcomes. They were looking at acute MI survivors and the medication that they were given post-MI. So this was significant because it was one of the largest studies looking specifically at an array of tools that are offered to us today, especially as pharma companies, to help improve medication adherence and therefore health outcomes. So I think interesting point. I want to look at a second example. This is from 2016. This is the REMIND clinical trial. And this was another trial. This now was 53,000 patients and also a 12-month intervention deploying digital solutions with a particular focus on medication taking reminders for patients. And in this study, the authors concluded the devices did not measurably improve medication adherence. And importantly, in their conclusion, they said they recommended that future research should focus on effective strategies to ensure uptake and sustained use of these interventions. And I think that was really an important conclusion as you read through the details of what worked and what didn't work in this study, because the experience of these research teams with these technologies is the experience we all have when you think about the number of apps that people download and maybe use for a maximum of 4 weeks. Or for those of you with smartphones, if you scan to your last page of icons, think about the last time you tapped on one of those. That's usually where pharma-based apps end up if they're not deleted completely. So there's And those results contrast with what sometimes the digital technology providers tell us when they're trying to sell us these exact same tools that have been shown not to work. And often the white papers and other studies show maybe a 2 or 3 month study of the intervention. And so that's the other thing I like about these papers is it was a 12-month intervention. We typically are looking for solutions that are going to have sustained use even well beyond 12 months. So in this environment of not great evidence, there is some evidence, there are some companies who are having success and are publishing their results in the peer-reviewed literature. In that environment, I think an example from the UK is a great example. Their National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, or NICE, have developed evidence standards framework for digital health technologies. And this is a framework that describes the types and levels of evidence that are needed to show the effectiveness and the expected economic impact of a digital health technology broadly. It's not a specific, it's not just medication adherence, it's not just connected devices. And they aim to establish consistent criteria against which digital health technologies can be assessed. And they've got sort of 3 main components in their framework. Evidence for effectiveness standards based on the functional classification of the digital health technology or the intended use of the digital health technology. Evidence for the economic impact standards, and then supporting resources, including case studies. And so I know these presentations will be made available in a PDF to attendees later, so there's a link here to all of these resources. This is freely available to the public, and it's one example of a way that a government and a single payer is trying to get their arms around what should we be delivering to the market and what are some proposed standards that we should be expected to meet in order for these technologies to be reimbursed in those markets. So what value propositions matter to stakeholders? I mentioned that in the last year and a half, we've done a significant amount of research, and I want to give some examples from one study in particular that we conducted last year where we were seeking to understand requirements, issues, and challenges both for our internal clinical stakeholders as well as external stakeholders associated with connected devices. Because we had indications from conversations with people that there was value in connected devices being applied in our clinical drug trials, and then obviously value with launched products on the market. So we surveyed about 35 internal stakeholders across all of our clinical development teams, pharmacology, our complaints group, medical affairs, et cetera. Everyone involved in clinical trial operations and design. And then externally, patients, caregivers, healthcare professionals. And this was a study that we conducted across the United States. And so some key results and issues that we uncovered, and some of these are positive and some of them are negative. For the internal stakeholders, they saw these connected devices as an opportunity to shed light on the at-home activities during clinical trials. There really was an overwhelming sense that patient comes in for clinical trial for a self-administered medication and gets sent home, and it's sort of a black box in the eyes of the clinical trial operations team about what actually happens in the patient's home when we send them home with this kit. And did they learn everything I trained them, and are they doing everything? And maybe I'll find out when they come back in a month for the next visit. They saw this as an opportunity to provide better data about device use, about the patient's medication taking behavior, and about progress in the clinical trial. They asked some key questions about whether these new data could lead to more complaints or issues that they have to address. So that's one of the hazards of saying, A, I've got a black box where I don't understand what's happening in the patient's home, and so I'm going to deploy tools that shed light on that and open that box up, and maybe everything I see there I'm not going to like, and I have to deal with it. They saw potential to improve the complaints process with better data. So now if we have these data, we'll maybe be able to do better troubleshooting during the clinical trials about what's going wrong or what sort of challenges the patient is having complying with the protocol. They saw it as an opportunity to intervene earlier, in protocols where maybe the patient is coming every month. If we see after week 1 that they're maybe not taking their medication according to the trial protocol, a nurse manager could call the patient and know that well before the patient comes 4 weeks later. And then there were key challenges highlighted in integration with our existing data systems. We have a number of data repositories that we deploy during our clinical trials, and the question was, how in any way do we integrate with those data systems, and exactly which data systems should the connected devices integrate with? On the external stakeholders, so patients, caregivers, and healthcare professionals, they saw the opportunity in these to increase confidence in a patient's ability to take the medication as directed, to improve the patient experience in managing their condition. Those stakeholders asked key questions about management of data, privacy, cybersecurity, many of the points that Aurelio raised earlier. An opportunity to integrate these tools into existing patient-doctor communication workflows. This was a really key one that has led us to think differently about whether Roche or Genentech should even launch its own apps, and that we really should be seeking partners who maybe already own that patient-doctor relationship in a digital medium. And then some key concerns about disposal and the environmental impact of adding connectivity to medical devices, and what does that mean about disposal of electronics and batteries. As we took all of this research and we started to think carefully about, well, what is the unique value that connected devices can bring, and how will they create that maximum value? And one thing that we got very clear about with our teams is that the connected device can't be their digital strategy. The connected device is one thin slice in a broader digital strategy that a team might be bringing to their clinical trial or to market. And so we actually have criteria for working with our therapeutic area teams and our brand teams to be able to see what is their digital strategy and what is the digital ecosystem that our connected devices have to exist in, and where are we going to do those points of integration. And I find it challenging to work with teams who don't have that and maybe want the connected device to be sort of the source of their digital strategy, and sometimes we have to say no. Another key area that we are looking at is how to design these digital solutions to help motivate the patient and keep the patient engaged. And I think this is just one example of an app that looks like many others that are available especially from pharma companies that focus, when trying to improve medication adherence, on having the patient track everything that they're doing and doing lots of logging. And accurate logging of medication adherence is great for clinicians and risk holders, and it's terrible for patients because they get less than zero value from it. And it's less than zero because they have to do work, but nothing comes back from it. And so patients, especially chronic disease patients who self-manage their conditions and self-administer their medications, have showed that they get burdened and disengaged when they're handed these apps that require a lot of logging and tracking. And so it's not, it doesn't actually match up with how our brains work and how you drive motivation and engagement. And so we're heavily focused on behavior design and applying behavioral sciences to the design of the user experiences of our digital solutions. And this is really, behavior design is taking cognitive neuroscience, behavioral economics, and proven experiments and marrying that with design thinking to really understand what is likely to overcome some of the cognitive biases that patients and all humans have. And this is an area that the tech industry has succeeded quite well in applying behavior design. In fact, when you look at YouTube or Instagram or Google or Facebook, they all have chief behavioral scientists sitting almost at the C-level of these companies. And their departments are there to apply cognitive neuroscience principles to the design of the user interfaces to keep us addicted. So you could argue that the first application of behavioral design has not been for good. And so we're thinking very carefully about how to take these same principles and what we understand about how the brain works for good, not to make patients addicted to our pharma apps, but really to support patients in improved self-management that we hope will lead to improved outcomes. And so we did, with one of our brand teams, did some work looking at literature review, and we sent our behavioral scientists into patients' homes across the US to understand how were they self-managing their condition and what was going on in their heads associated with their self-management. And in this particular project, we were able to identify 3 sort of driving principles of their non-persistence associated with 9 operant brain principles. And that allowed our behavioral team to come up with 8 preliminary behavior targets. And that was one of the first projects we did where we sent our behavioral scientists into patients' homes. And what was so surprising to the brand team and to the team working on this is that most of the behavioral targets and most of the solution design had nothing to do with medication taking at all. It had to do with supporting the patient in self-management of their condition. And in a sense, the medication-taking aspects of this are sort of a Trojan horse that's sitting behind the scenes in the solution. And so this is just an example. I've grayed this out because this is an actual design that we're iterating on internally. But what I'm highlighting is some of the features and functionalities that came out of the behavior design research that patients were looking for credit for the process of taking care of themselves, not the outcome, not the doing of something, just that I paid attention to my self-management. Leveraging loss aversion by capturing streaks of behavior, doing manageable tracking. And so I just finished saying all this tracking and logging is a terrible idea. And the way that we learned from patients to think about tracking was to do short sprints of tracking a particular behavior, not just the one we maybe care about the most, which is, did you take your medication, did you take your medication, did you take your medication, but any habit.
What is streak tracking?
So,
I don't understand streak.
Yeah.
Streak.
Yeah, so streak tracking was invented by the athletic digital solutions like Fitbit and Nike. And the idea was you do something once, you do it a second time, you do it a third time, and right about that moment between the second and the third time, your digital solution starts to say, oh, you're on a hot streak, you've done this 3 times in a row, go for 4, go for 5, go for 6, so that type of a streak. That motivation and engagement is tied to a particular cognitive bias that our brains have of loss aversion. I don't want to lose something that I've been gaining. And what I've been gaining in this case is a collection of successes. So given all of that, as Aurelia highlighted, it's hard to necessarily bring all of these technologies in-house, and so we're regularly seeking design and development partners. So I want to talk a little bit about how we think about how do we pick a design and development partner, and with a particular focus on these digital solutions, whether connected devices, digital therapeutics, et cetera. And we have sort of a standard structure and approach that starts with defining the business need, establishing an evaluation team, defining our target product profile for the digital solution and what our requirements are, and then performing a landscape assessment, and then making an evaluation and recommendation to the organization for who to partner with. And some of the key areas that we focus on are what's our commercial strategy, and what will the digital partner have as a role in our commercial strategy, if any? What will happen during the clinical development of this solution? What's the role of the partner in the clinical development of this solution? Key areas on technical development, whether it's mechanical components, electronic systems, software. Legal considerations, both in the contracting with the digital partner, but also ownership of intellectual property, because now we're talking about solutions that need to iterate and be refreshed, and new versions released every month. And how do we manage that intellectual property? Cybersecurity and data privacy, this is quite unique to these types of solutions, so hyper-focus on that. And then regulatory. Is the digital solution going to be part of our combination product and part of our BLA? Is it an oral dosage form with software as a medical device, and therefore a new type of combination product in the US? All of those considerations. And so for my last couple of slides, I just want to do a deep dive on one of those, on the technical development side, to sort of double click on what we care about and what we're looking for in these digital partners. So we're looking at their development organization, structure, and approach to development. We're looking for evidence of the partner's capability and compliance with a variety of health authority standards. We want to know they know how to do software development against the IEC 62304 standards. We want to know they understand risk management. We want to know that they can do human factors and usability engineering to the 62366 standard. We want to know they understand quality management systems and have the ability to create compliant design history files as part of these solutions. They don't have to be the legal manufacturer, but they have to be able to give us documents that we can deposit right into our quality management system. We're also looking for evidence of capability and compliance with other standards. So it's not just about the health authorities anymore when we're talking about digital. It's about cybersecurity standards, data privacy standards, understanding the country's specific requirements, because these products launch in multiple countries, and each one takes a different approach, or a tailored or customized approach. What do they understand about GDPR? What do they understand about HIPAA and how to comply with it? Are they high trust certified? This has become a big one for us, because that high trust certification, that sort of, if you can show us your certificate for high trust, you have a much easier way in as a partner with us. And then, are they on top of the latest standards and requirements? California Consumer Privacy Act just took effect. It's like GDPR for California. And then finally, we're going to evaluate the partner's quality systems. How good is their ability to implement design controls? What sort of tools and methods do they use? How do they go about risk management? How do they do their hazards analysis, traceability, et cetera? And then, again, unique to these digital solutions, what's their approach to clinical and launch platform support? For those of you who have launched digital solutions that involve an app, you have an understanding of, yes, everyone says iOS and Android, and think that that means two development efforts. But what it really means is which versions of iOS, which versions of Android, which handset form factors, which pixel dimensions, et cetera, and how do you stay on top of that as new phones launch every year, and how do you make decisions about which handsets are going to be obsolete? We want to know what our partners' understanding and capability is to manage even that mobile smartphone ecosystem. And then also, how is the partner going to support us in the post-marketing surveillance and reporting activities that we're required to do under the health authority regulations? And with that, I thank you. If there's time for questions, I'm happy to take a question. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. As you have noticed, the co-chairs are doing half of the work each of it, so it's the professor and me, and then it's the professor again. Any questions for Paul, apart from streak?
Streaks.
That was the
That's
question.
a good question, yeah.
No? Yeah, and maybe also say who you are and why you are and that stuff.
Hello, so I'm David Drono from Sanofi, so I'm working on pharmaceutical packaging for R&D. And I appreciated a lot your approach regarding effectively the dissemination of system we are pushing to patients and to caregivers. So according to you, what is the solution to avoid really this dissemination? Because we can understand that these people will have tons of application, and at the end, I'm sure they will quit, most of them, because it will be so painful. So what is your vision about that?
Paralysis by analysis.
Yeah, that is a million, perhaps billion-dollar question.
Billion, or is it 10 billion? Is it 10 billion?
1 billion, yeah. Depends on the brand. So I'll give you one example where we're seeing some success. One of our brand teams found a digital partner who already owns the relationship between doctors in a particular specialty area and the patients. And they've delivered a digital solution that was first adopted by the clinic and hospital system. And then doctors recommended it to their patients, and it provides things like communication back and forth between the healthcare team and the patient. So not over traditional email, but through this proprietary network. There are assessment tools and questionnaires that can be deployed to the patient for this system. But the patients also then get an online appointment management system, so they're not on the phone making appointments. They can see when their doctor's available. The patients also get disease-specific information and education as part of this. And one of our criteria in going out and looking in this particular therapeutic area was to try and find companies that had this relationship. And the partnership that we're forming with them is associated with an upcoming launch of one of our products in this therapeutic area. And we have been doing some interesting algorithm development, predictive analytics in this therapeutic area, and have a pretty interesting algorithm where if we get sufficient data from the patient and the healthcare professional, we think we can predict exacerbations and issues in this population that will both help us with monitoring how our medication is doing in the patient population, but also help the healthcare team intervene with the patient before the problem gets so serious that maybe they require hospitalization. And so we are taking the connected devices, we develop our connected devices and provide an SDK or a software development kit so that our devices can be integrated into any digital solution. We'll give permission, sign an agreement to allow that to happen. We have no particular desire to keep them proprietary. And then other parts of our digital solution for the predictive algorithm are getting data, anonymized data from the EHR and patient-reported outcomes. And so the partnership that we have signed will just put some of the technology we've developed inside of this existing digital solution. And the idea is that when our drug gets prescribed by the doctor, the patient will get a notification on their existing mobile app that they already use with this doctor saying, now because you're taking brand X, there's some new features and functionality that have been unlocked for you. And they'll see this new user experience that we have designed and specified built into this solution, and then we'll start to see the data. And then when the patient is taken off our medication, then that goes away, and so it's not in the face of the patient anymore. And so it's one example. It's not the only way to do this, but it's one example of a way that we're seeing that we can take unique proprietary technology that we've developed, but integrate it into a user experience that somebody else created, and where that relationship is a much more trusted relationship from a digital solution perspective, and isn't branded as coming from a pharma company.